right, I want to welcome those who will also be joining us via YouTube. This is the Moorhead Church of Christ Wednesday evening Bible study. We are studying through the book of Judges. And the book of Judges may not seem like something that is as significant as a lot of other books in the Bible, but we've got to remember this, that if it's inspired by the Holy Spirit, which it is, then it certainly has value to us today. In other words, we can learn lessons from God's people that lived long before us, and we can learn valuable lessons from them, and we should never sort of have the approach that we don't really need to know of what happened in the past, because the past, learning about what happened in the past is benefit for us in the present, so that we can learn how to be the kind of people God wants us to be and not make some of the same mistakes that God's people did then. We can learn from that because even though we're in the new covenant, God's nature hasn't changed, and his expectations for his people are the same: holy and righteous people that are committed to doing his will. And so this book is valuable insight in terms of, what happened in a previous time, and sort of the disappointments of God's people when they really weren't committed to him, and really the benefits of seeing that when they changed their heart and they changed their lives, that God was certainly going to help them. And we've been studying about these cycles, and there's 6 of them in there in the book of Judges, in which his people, the Israelites, are walking with God, and then at some point they move away from God. They get involved with idolatry. God allows their enemies that they should have conquered and destroyed the promised land. He allows them to rise up to oppress them for a period of time until his people cry out for deliverance, and God sends a judge to deliver them, and then they're back to the top of this cycle. And it seems like they would learn from the first cycle, but they end up going through 6 cycles, and we're actually in the 6th of those 6 cycles, and the last judge of the book of Judges, who is Samson. And so in chapter 13, we pretty much, the Bible writer introduces us to Samson. You'll recall that Samson, out of all of the judges, Samson is the 12th one. Unlike the other judges who were already born and were pretty much adults, Samson's not even born yet. And so basically, we have the angel of the Lord going to the parents of Samuel and saying, this is what's going to happen. Samson, yeah. It's going to come, essentially, you're going to get this child, and essentially they're telling him this is going to be the next deliverer or judge of Israel, that he's going to have this unique vow that he's going to be under called the Nazarite vow. We've already explained that. And what we know about Samson, he's probably the most prominent one of all the judges, and that is that he was very, very strong. And anyway, a really marked difference from Samson too, real quick, and the other judges, is that the other judges essentially went around when they were getting ready to conquer their oppressors and raised an army. How many armies does Samson, if you remember the story, how many armies does Samson raise when he goes to essentially battle the Philistines?
No.
He's kind of like a one-man army,
Yeah.
which isn't pretty incredible. So anyway, we're going to move into chapter 14, and now we're really going to talk about, we left at the end of chapter 13, in verse 25, it said, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. It's talking about Samson in Mahanath Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. And so we're going to begin with the first 4 verses of chapter 14. And Jenna, would you like to read that for us, please?
Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. So he came back and told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. Then his father and his mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people, that you go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she looks good to me. However, his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Now at that time the Philistines were ruling over Israel.
Okay, so remember that going back to 13 and verse 1, the Philistines have oppressed the Israelites for 40 years. And now, the idea is finally, there is going to be deliverance here. And we talked about some of this last week. We just kind of got started with this. That Timnah is a city on the northern border of Judah near Beth Shemesh. And Timnah was allotted to the tribe of Dan. And at this point, it seems that the Philistines now occupy that. And we looked at what the Holman Bible Atlas said. It's a complete guide to the expansive geography of biblical history. And essentially it talks about the idea that the Philistines sort of come on aboard when essentially they come from, they believe, Crete and come across the Mediterranean Sea. And then they get on really the territory of Judah and essentially start conquering the land. And what the Holman Bible Atlas points out is these guys were fierce warriors, so they started to take land on the coast, and essentially they move inland. And the Philistines are really going to be the most difficult challenge that the Israelites are going to have in terms of occupying the promised land. So I'm not going to review all the rest that I have with that here, but just sort of to bring us up to the point where we're left off here. In verse 2 it says, the Bible writer says, so he came back, talking about Samson, told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as wife. And so we're going to see something up here about Samson. The idea that he keeps making these statements. He saw her, she looks good, I want you to get her for me. And all of these statements sort of see is that he's gone to Timnah, which is not all that far from where he's at in Zoar. And he essentially wants to marry this woman, this Philistine woman. Apparently he's attracted to her beauty. The idea that it might also involve sexual lust, but the idea is he's like, I saw her and I want her, she looks good to me, and I want my family essentially to get her for me as wife. Now I want to ask you, we look at the reaction of the parents in verse 3, what is the problem here with Samson wanting to marry this beautiful woman from Timnah and have her as wife?
Well, God said he couldn't be with the Philistines.
Okay.
So, he's not supposed to do that. So it appears that he's wanting to either has an ulterior motive, like to trick the Philistines to get better ground, conquering them.
Okay. Let's start with that premise there. The idea that when you go back to what the law of Moses said in relation to the Israelites, they're preparing them really to go in the promised land, is that according to Exodus 34, 12 through 16, really marrying somebody who was not an Israelite was strictly forbidden. And not only was it condemned under the law of Moses in Exodus 34, 12 through 16, but you recall that Joshua himself reiterated the same prohibition to Israel in Joshua chapter 23, 12 through 13. This is near the end of his life before he passed away. He issues that same prohibition. But I want you to look at this scripture before we go on and sort of notice what is written in Deuteronomy chapter 7. So we're actually going to read this one. And see, we get a volunteer to read Deuteronomy 7. Ryan, 3 through 6.
Okay. Deuteronomy 7, 3 through 6. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. But thus you shall do to them. You shall tear down their altars, and smash their sacred pillars, and hew down their Asherim, and burn their graven images with fire. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his own possession, out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any of the peoples, for you were the fewest of all people.
Okay, very good. So he didn't want his people to go into the promised land and really assimilate. The idea is these people are really being, God is using the Israelites as an instrument of judgment. They're wicked people, they're sinful people, and you're to go in there. You're not supposed to play nice with them. You're not supposed to say, yeah, okay, you can live there. We're good with your gods and things around us. There's a real, genuine concern. Remember that the Israelites have an important purpose in terms of salvation history. What's the important purpose in terms of salvation history?
It's the lineage of Christ.
They're going to bring forth the Messiah. And the point they need to realize, they need to sort of stay a pure people. They cannot essentially get tied in with these pagan peoples, because they have pagan gods, they have pagan ways, and they're not supposed to have anything to do with that. And the caution is that if you don't get rid of them, or if you sort of intermingle with them, what's going to happen is that you're going to essentially be pulled away. You're going to be pulled off into sort of the same sort of pagan religion as them. And so the concern here that God has is genuine. And if you read through the Old Testament, that's exactly what happens. They didn't conquer all the peoples. They left peoples behind. And essentially, instead of really holding true to the God of the heaven and the God that gave them the law and so forth, they were sort of intrigued by what other pagan peoples around them were doing. They were curious about their gods, and they got involved with idolatry. And that really was a terrible thing in terms of the Israelite history. Ricky?
Maybe Samson said that just to confuse them, really didn't marry her. Saying that he was wanting to marry her for his parents to get them as a strategy to, did he marry?
Well, yeah, he married her. In fact, he's the one that brought it to his parents and said, hey, she looks good to me, this woman in Timnah, get her for me as a wife. He's saying that to his parents.
I was thinking he did, but
Yeah.
I was asking that question just
Yeah.
in case. I was thinking he did marry her and
Yeah.
stuff, but yeah, it's weird that he would marry her after God forbid it, as people do.
So Samson used incredibly poor judgment. Go ahead.
Yeah, like as my dear brother was reading from chapter 7, then he's actually explained for Samson, because this was forbidden from him not being married to them, because they were
Right.
going to turn, if they were going to marry such a people, they were going to turn their heart against God. That
Right.
was, the forbidden part in chapter 7.
Yep.
And now you can understand to see, even his parents knew that he's not supposed to do that. There was a fear there from the parents that, don't you have other women among us here?
Yeah.
But then again, you look at God as an all-knowing God. He knew that this was going to happen. Then you
Yep.
understand why Samson was able to kill his enemy, because it's already in Deuteronomy chapter 7 that they were going to pull the altars down and all of this down, because these people did not know God. So,
Yeah, and we're saying that they ignore God's wisdom. So you ignore God's wisdom, it comes at a price. And
Yeah.
and real the danger when you think about, don't give your daughters for them to marry, and don't you essentially take their daughters to marry. What's going to happen? You essentially are, as a people, are going to really come together with pagan people. I don't want that, because you're going to essentially pick up and adopt their practices, and maybe they'll pick up some of yours, but essentially you're going to have this syncretic religion where it's going to be a sort of a meshing of both worlds, and that's not what God wants for people. The idea is that you stay away from them, and this is what the parents of Samson bring out, is that, hey, we've got our own people, and he's really the father's trying to bring it to attention.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and you can see what happens.
Yeah.
You look at Solomon and look at what happened to him later
Right.
in life. That's what happened.
Right, and
You
it
start
says they
building
turned
altars
away.
for all these,
Yeah.
idols and stuff.
Yeah, and so God's wisdom, the idea is when you thumb your nose at God's wisdom, it's to your own peril. I mean, we could make 101 applications today. 101 applications. The idea is anytime God says something in His Word, and we go, well, I don't know. you know, I don't think it's that big a deal. You're begging for trouble because you're essentially saying what I think and what I feel is more important what God has said. Now, God understands everything far above what I do. And so for me to sort of say, well, I don't know if I see it the same way, or I don't look at it the same way, is essentially thumbing your nose at God's wisdom, okay? So I want to look at really a specific application. And when we think about the wisdom that God has here, in relation to marrying those who are not God's people, what is the wisdom for our young people today?
Well, I would say not to get involved with people. Are you talking about like marrying or?
Oh yeah, I mean, like you have young people today. What wisdom is there here for young unmarried people today from this passage?
Yeah, just want to make a statement. You see, like today, at least you need to seek the face of God and also pray about your marriage when you want to marry. Then also listening to the voice of your parents.
Okay.
Because definitely they brought you to this earth and definitely has a say in your life. Like in where I come from in Africa,
Yeah.
before you marry, if your parents don't fully
Approve?
approve your marriage, there's bound to be problem later on in the marriage.
So if the parents, let me get sure I understand you correctly. If somebody's going to get married, the parents, if they don't approve of who you're going to marry,
Yeah.
that person doesn't marry if the parent doesn't approve.
Yeah, in most cases,
Yeah.
if you are the one who obey your parents, in most
Yeah.
cases they will not marry that person.
Right.
Because there are bound to be issue. And later on, if you actually go ahead
Right.
from surveys, if you actually go ahead and marry that person later on in life,
Right.
that marriage is going to have some problem.
Sure.
Because there's an adage they said, what an elderly man is sitting and seeing in front,
Right.
a young man, even when you standing or climb a kind of a tree,
Right.
you will not be able to see what he's seeing in front.
Yeah.
So, in those, the elderly ones, they really have a kind of foresight when they say they don't want you to marry this person or this thing. Like in the case of Samson, the parents actually did that, but I felt Manoah, remember when the angel of the Lord appeared to the wife and he told Manoah was not there then. He told Manoah, and Manoah prayed to God. He has some belief in God that God, I want to see this angel again.
Sure.
And the angel came back. And we remember that means he has faith in God. So Manoah would have actually go ahead to make things difficult for Samson. No, I don't want you to marry
Yeah.
Philistine by all means, since he knows that God actually informed them not to marry. But
Right.
actually, I also reason that Manoah also have that belief that since this is a child given to us by God,
Right.
God must have hand in this. When Samson insisted, by all means, even when he tried to advise Samson and all the rest, insisted that I want to marry her. When you go down to verse 4, so he said, why did you? He said, no. He said, this is the woman for me. He said, you
Right.
must get her for me. So
Right.
I believe the parents reasoned together that since this child was given to us by God,
Right.
and now he's insisting in what this, God must have hand in this. I believe that was why Manoah allowed the Samson to marry from there. Even when you read that place, it's named, not knowing that this is a way for God to
Yeah.
actually find a loophole
Right.
to enter the Philistines so that
Yeah.
he can
Yeah.
destroy them. So
Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna get to that part there. Yeah. Yes. Rick.
Well, and I also believe, God wants us to make sure when we marry,
Right.
as Christians,
Yeah.
that they should be in the Church of Christ
Right.
and stuff, and that's part of, judgment, and get to know them,
Yeah.
because that, that's a big, because God comes first.
Yeah.
God is the number one in your life.
Right.
And you gotta make sure whoever comes to your life or whatever, that they're gonna, obey God.
Right.
And stuff, because, we have to put God as front center
Yeah.
and stuff, so.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, and so we think about, there's a couple of things in here when we sort of consider what's going on here. The fact that you know, when we look at Samson, it says, you know, I saw this woman, you know, she looks good to me, marry her. And the idea is he obviously doesn't know what to look for in a mate. Now, I have bad news for you, Samson. Eventually, the outside changes, and what you should be is in love with the person inside. Okay? The outside is going to change. The Bible sort of brings that out. And, you know, 1 Peter chapter 3 talks about the hidden woman of the heart, and the idea that that's really the beauty you want. The idea that you would sort of make a judge, or you'd make a pick, choose somebody as a mate for life based on their looks, seems like the most shallowest of reasons. Okay, but we want to also recognize what Brother Timothy saw, the idea that, you know, sometimes kids, you know, when younger kids are they're dating, getting that age of maritable age, and they find somebody, and, you know, they want the parents to accept them. They're Christian, and, you know, they may be, you know, dating somebody that's a non-Christian. There ought to be warnings about this is not a good idea. When you are dating somebody who's a non-Christian, then your spiritual interests are not well served. In other words, you're not really looking out for your spiritual well-being. You're essentially saying, you know, I want to follow God all these different ways, but when it comes to a mate, you know, that's not really going to matter. It's going to make a tremendous difference. It's going to make a tremendous difference whether you marry a Christian or whether you marry a non-Christian. I'm not going to say that essentially some marriages between Christians never end. I wish that wasn't the case. It shouldn't be the case, but it does happen. But I want us to consider some things. If a young person, before I go on there, sort of ignores really the wisdom of God, sort of the wisdom of the parents. I know of a situation, I'm going to use this as an example, without names, nobody here, but a young man found a woman that he sort of fell in love with and wanted to marry. She was not a Christian. It comes to light that friends of this person were telling the man that this young lady is actively, you know, involved with other men, showing attention to them, and you know, it's sort of saying one thing to you and sort of doing another thing. Okay. And the parents of this young man also chimed in and sort of said, you know, we have also heard these reports, and said it to their son, said, we're very concerned about it, and we wish you would just sort of take into consideration that this person isn't really being straightforward with you. Here's what happened. The parents' wisdom was rejected. The friend's wisdom was rejected. And essentially what happened was that they got married, and eventually the man's wife committed adultery. Here's the trouble when you ignore parents. Parents essentially are in your corner. If you're the son or daughter, they're in your corner. And if son or daughter is, you know, I'm in love with this person, what happens is they're in that romantic stage, their head's up in the cloud, stars are going around their head. They have this idea that, you know, I see it all perfectly. It's all just going to be great, just like I think. And the problem with the parents is the idea is they have their feet on the ground. They've had the experience of life. They've been around the block a few times. And they're in the best position to really offer up sound advice as to, you know, the mate that you have. You should want to give them some kind of consideration and not sort of think, well, you just don't like this person for some reason, some unexplained reason. You know what? If they don't have your best interests in mind, if they're not spiritually minded, if they're not really interested in Christianity, don't marry them. And here's a situation that should have never taken place. As much as we look at Samson and being the strong guy and accomplishing a lot of things, in a lot of ways he was very foolish in his judgment about things. And I want to, sister, go ahead.
And the spiritual battle.
Yeah.
You were in those relationships, personally speaking.
Sure.
One or the other is gonna pull more weight.
Right.
And it's that peace, because you can't serve two masters. God
That's it.
or the evil one.
Right.
And it's a tug of war. It's overwhelmingly exhausting, emotionally, spiritually, mentally,
Sure.
and physically. I mean, you're battling constantly. There's no peace.
Right.
Because it's like a tug of war. One wants to pull one this way, the other one wants to pull the other way.
Right.
And the importance of praying together.
Yeah.
An unbeliever, or that second guessing, well, maybe I do believe, but I don't really believe that much.
Right.
Or, I kind of do, but I'm still waiting for God to talk to me, or,
Right.
It's so important, personal experience that you do, and the importance of it, and not, okay, well, that person got married, oh yeah, I was gonna be baptized, but not to be with you either.
Right.
Know their fruits, how is this person?
Right.
You could tell by a good person, getting to know,
Right.
taking time. They're hard, they're generally a good person or not. If they're
Yeah.
vain, if they're conceited, if they're rude, mean, hateful. But, so I told my children the importance of being with, and they've seen firsthand, they experience that in the
Sure.
home. When there's, one that wants to serve and one that does not. And they
Right.
experience the chaos in the home
Right.
when that's going on, the tug of war that's going on.
Yep.
And there's no way that when you're not equally yoked, that it's going to work. It's not. There's nothing more beautiful to me than seeing married couples that pray together, that fight at war. They fight on their knees and over their children, over their home.
Right.
That is the most amazing thing.
Yep.
And when you marry a non-believer, there's no way, that common ground, that's the most important thing,
Sure.
is that, and you're gonna be influenced if you're not a strong Christian.
Right.
Usually young children, they're, younger teenagers, they're trying to figure out who they are, what they're gonna
Yeah.
become, and you fall into that, temptation of beauty,
Right.
or handsome guys, or what have
Well,
you.
there's
that-
initial attraction is
Yeah,
good,
it's
but
always that physical
but-
first attraction,
Yeah.
but beyond that, so I always tell my children, it's who they are as people. Don't
Yeah.
judge how they look, because people get old, that beauty fades away. It could be the most beautiful girl,
Yeah.
but she could be horribly ugly inside,
Yeah.
or vice versa for a boy.
Right.
But that importance of you're wanting to serve God, that should be a priority. And better that you be alone than to be with an unbeliever that that probably
Yeah.
is not going to want to
Yeah.
serve God,
Yeah.
or that risk that they may or may not.
Right.
And it's a big gamble, because
Yeah.
it might not
Yeah.
work in your
Let-
favor.
Right. Let me put something out this, and it's a very bold statement, but I stand behind 100%. There is no spiritual benefit whatsoever in marrying a non-Christian.
Where is it? No.
There's not. When you assess things from a spiritual point of view, not a romantic point of view and all that, but a spiritual point of view, there is no benefit in marrying somebody who is not a Christian, because you basically are going to have a mixed marriage. You're going to essentially have a spiritually incompatible marriage where essentially you have light and your darkness, and you're going to try to make this work. And here's what I want to say is that this is extremely difficult without one or the other compromising, coming to the side of the other one. And so think about this. If you marry somebody who's a non-Christian, you will never find any spiritual encouragement from that person. They're not interested in spiritual. They're interested in you, but they're not interested in spiritual things. So if you're struggling spiritually and you're married to a non-Christian, the person that's closest to you in your life is not going to be there for you spiritually.
Makes you harder to stay obedient to God too.
Absolutely. Okay? So that non-Christian mate is not going to help you spiritually. They're not going to essentially help you if you're struggling with being obedient to God. You're sort of on an island. You're on your own, because you're not going to have their help. Not only that, but it gets even more complicated. Once children are born from this relationship, there's going to be this mindset, whether the mother or the father is a Christian and the other one is not, is one's going to want to take those children to church, and the other one's going to say, I don't see why you're all uptight about that. I mean, just go ahead and go. You know, if the children don't want to go, why are you making them? Okay?
The Bible, the scriptures, we already know our roles. You got the husband, you have the wife. The
Right.
husband's supposed to lead the home. How can that happen if a woman, you know, if a young girl marries a non-believer?
Right.
Or just the whole concept of marriage
Right?
that God ordained and He made. There's no way. It's impossible. It really is. It is because it just will
It
not.
is. It is a very, very difficult road to go, and I've got some actual statistics for you that I want us to look at. But here's the last thing. There's a lot of things here to say about this, but here to me is the most, I don't know, probably the most profound, and that is imagine yourself a Christian. You manage to live a faithful life your entire life. Your spouse never converts, and your children, you might, if you have two, you might be one for one. Maybe you have them both. Maybe they go the other side. But one of the most painful things it'll be is when you go in the afterlife, the person that you've invested your emotions in your whole entire life, you're going to go to heaven, and they're going to go to hell. Why? Because they weren't dedicated to God. And I think some people think, well, I fell in love with that person, and you know, I can't help it, but I love that person. It says, wouldn't it be better to sort of pull yourself out of the romantic zone and put yourself back in the spiritual zone and say, is it worth all of this only to find out that in the afterlife, I'm never going to see this person again?
Even have that in the Lord's church. You have two people that's dedicated and stuff living for the Lord in the Lord's church, and there's been husbands or wives quit going to the Lord's church.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen people in my life, you know, do that, you know, and that's another thing. I mean, you've got to really make sure, you know, when you and Ray J met each other, you all dated for a while, got to know each other, you know, before you got married. And that's what people should do, you know. You should get to know how they treat their family and how, you know, the others.
People spend more time going on vacation, planning to go on vacation sometimes than they do in terms of really looking for a mate. And here's why we have marriage counseling. By the way, we have marriage counseling, and that is that usually young people are just sort of the attraction, you know, the romance, and they've got this mindset, you know, we're going to marry, and you know what, we're just going to get on that horse together, right off into that sunset, and everything's going to be great. And they don't talk about how many children they're going to have. They don't talk about where they're going to live. They don't talk about where, you know, how the arrangement is going to be, if it's going to be in terms of the working arrangement. You know, the husband is the one responsible for supporting his family. You know, what is the wife's intention? Is she going to take seriously the responsibility that she's really has charge of the household? You know, do they talk about finances? In other words, we don't talk about that, and one's really good with finances and the other one isn't, and all of a sudden there's trouble in paradise. And so sometimes people don't consider all those things. The greatest one, of course, being somebody wants to marry a non-Christian. Here's what I'm going to tell you straight up. Anytime somebody comes to me, they're Christian, they want to marry a non-Christian, my number one job is to talk them out of it. I'm going to talk you out of it, talk you out of it, talk you out of it, talk you out of it. And if you decide to do it, I'm going to tell you it's a bad idea and you're going to regret it. But that's the whole point is that, you know, when we look at the text here, the Father is saying, we have our own people. And of course, here's what I've heard many times is, well, we just don't have, you know, enough, you know, for a Christian man to find a Christian woman. We just don't have a big supply. And we're not compatible. And here's what I also say. You know what? Second to becoming a Christian, the next biggest decision you'll make is getting married. If you can't find a good man here or a good woman here that's going to work for you, move somewhere where there's a lot more. Doesn't that make sense? Go to a big congregation down south, fall in love with somebody there and say, you know what? I'd really like to see you come this way. And maybe you'll be lucky enough to bring them all the way back, or maybe you're going to be there. But at least you're going to be married to a Christian. And so the idea is that God's wisdom is so wise. And I don't know if we'll get to 2 Corinthians 6, you alluded to that, 14 through 18. But I really want to get to this study. So in the churches of Christ, there's not been an exhaustive study, but really it is a study conducted by a fellow named Neil Pryor, and they did a study in a congregation in Oklahoma. So my resource for this is from the Spiritual Sword, April 2000. The man's name is David Powell. The article is entitled "Marry a Christian." So he mentions here that Neil Pryor, who's a brother in the church, talked about in a lesson reasons why you should marry a Christian. And in the lesson, he mentioned a congregation in Oklahoma where 143 young people who grew up there were studied. The survey sought to discover what happened to these young people when they got married. And the study results are, they found that, so we started with 143 young people, 143. They found that 79 of them married outside the church. In other words, they married non-Christians. And of this number, so you got 79. How many? I'm gonna let you guess. Just throw. How many of them left the church out of the 79 that married a non-Christian?
65.
That's pretty high. It's a little high. Yeah.
50.
You're right in there. So of this number, so you got 79. 57 left the church, and only
Wow.
22 were still faithful.
Well, Jesus says, if you will find it, and many will go to destruction.
Sure. So, and it said here, okay, so of the 79, only 22 remained faithful, and of those 22 that remained faithful, let's guess at how many converted their mate out of 22.
Like 3.
No, a little higher than that.
Maybe 5.
14. 14 out of 22. And so when you look at this, the statistics aren't that great. Almost, he says here, David Powell in his article said almost 1 in 3 of these marriages ended in divorce, which is about the national average. Isn't that tragic? These are Christians. He says, on the other hand, 64 of them married in the church. In other words, they married a Christian. Well, let's guess at the number of how many left the church. When they married, 64 of them married a Christian. How many of these people left the church once they married a Christian? I wish it was, but that's pretty close. 5. Can you sort of see the difference? We're not done with statistics, but can you sort of see why it's wise to marry somebody who's a Christian? I know it's not politically correct. I know that if your children end up starting dating a non-Christian, what's going to happen is they're going to bypass their spiritual interest, what's in their best spiritual interest, and they're going to say, in spite of that, this person, this gal, this guy, they're super great, and I think we just have this great marriage and all that. This is reality, okay? This is the reality of the situation. So 64 of them married in the church. Of this number, just 5 left the church. 59 were still faithful, and there were only 2 divorces. That speaks to the wisdom of God. And so, as parents, we essentially, when our kids get to dating age, we need to really sort of get out in front of that and say, I know you think this gal is cute or that guy is handsome. We need to get in front of it and say, you know what, if we don't get out in front of it, they're going to end up getting married to somebody who's not a Christian. What's going to happen is they're going to struggle spiritually, probably won't ever be a strong Christian, and they may not make it, essentially, to be faithful until death. Any thoughts or questions about that before I kind of pick up and move on? Okay, Mom?
For me, right, like I should say, it's 100%, true that sometimes it's saddened where you see this huge number of believers being divorced. It's very heartbreaking for me. I just think like if more, leaders was doing more concern like with the youth, as they're reaching those ages, to educate them,
Yeah.
while parents at home Because Lord, marriage is a beautiful thing. This is an institution of God. God
Sure.
requires us to marry. He
Right.
wants us to be happy,
Right.
So that's why I take passion of marriage, because I'm one of, as she was explaining her own, I'm one of those two. I can testify what I'm going through. That time I break down before God. But hey, the deed is being done. You understand? I
Yeah.
just gotta keep on asking God to pull me through.
Right.
You understand? Because
Right.
that's why I try to educate my children.
Right.
Because it's important, it's beautiful when you see a husband and a wife, in the presence of God, you admire that.
Right.
You understand? You admire it
Right.
because it also helps the children at home. You understand? To come out in the fear of God.
Sure.
You understand? So a lot of churches, if the leaders not just standing, they go around the pulpit and just, merging a man and a woman together. Do counseling with these people.
Sure.
Know more of them. You understand? Understanding mind. That's why I think Paul talks about it. You have the zeal. Many of us is running with the zeal, but the knowledge of Christ we don't have. You
Right.
understand? So if you don't have the knowledge of Christ
Right.
and you just running with the zeal,
Yeah.
you bound to fail.
Yeah.
You bound to fail. So it's very important
Yeah.
for men and women to know the knowledge
Yeah.
what a marriage requires.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a good point, and we also recognize that in the New Testament times, when the gospel is being preached, that you're going to have a wife that converts and a husband that doesn't. And of course, 1 Peter 3 deals with that situation. We understand that. Sometimes people decide to marry a non-Christian anyway, but they still have an obligation to be faithful. But the first line of defense for your children marrying a Christian mate is the parents. So we put that firmly on the parents. The church is the second line of defense. In other words, the church needs to be teaching about it, preaching about it, whatever, but the parents have to really get out in front of it. Your kids get that age, they're going to look at people around them that aren't Christians, they're going to get interested in them, they're going to bypass their spiritual interests if we don't really get out in front of it, tell them what we've got to really focus on in the mate is a spiritual aspect of it. But that's really the first line of defense, and so we want to do that because we know it has implications. I'll get you real quick. It has implications if they go forward and they get married. And as we've seen the statistics, as much as we want to be optimistic, realistically, it's not going to be a good situation. Brother Timothy.
I just want to make a comment on the survey. I would have really loved to see the survey, assuming the people that carried out the survey, if they actually included the sexes, maybe male and female, in it to actually compare. Because for me, I actually done a little survey on my own from my local congregation where I'm coming from, because I worship in a congregation where over 400
Right.
members. We have over 400 members in the Lost Church over in Nigeria where I used to worship. I found out that if a male from the church went outside to marry an unbeliever, that male is totally lost, because you never see that person in the church again. But on the other hand, if a female from the Lost Church married an unbeliever, there's, I would say, 70% chance that you will likely find the husband in the church.
Sure.
Because from my survey, the women were able to convert the unbelieving male to the church.
Okay.
And in most cases, this may become useful in the church. They become
Sure.
zealous for God.
Sure.
Then I'll just look at it. What is the purpose of this? Now, here, that may not be possible because you have what we call cultural differences. Because in my country, where I'm coming from, you don't have the woman getting work or carrying up, opting for a career that will actually take her whole time. My wife cannot go to work at night if I'm in my country, or do a job that she would be at work from morning till night. It's not possible because women are the homemaker.
Okay.
I do the work, I own my business, I do work to provide for the family 100%. So she needs to be there to guide the church. So with love, care, and all the rest, just as the Bible commands them to respect the man, honor the man, because when I actually interviewed some of these women who were able to convert their husband, how do you do that? Because I was curious when I see the occurrence. They said because the Bible commands them to honor the husband, to give them respect, and to love them in response to their own love, that they show them that there's actually, Christian is actually different from the worldly aspect. They show them the love that Christ have, honor them, be there for them, even though they know that they are not Christians, but they totally submit to them in the aspect of as that will not infringe God's commandment. That actually give the man the response. When they look at them, some of them will say, even when they are cooking, they will be praying on the food. Please help me convert, help me touch this man. God help me touch the man. And at the end of the day, the man end up in the church. I would say just cultural difference, because that cannot happen here. Because the man work, the husband actually work in order to fight for the family so that the home can meet. Yeah, that's why I say cultural difference also amount to this thing. Yes.
Okay. All right. You know, I'm not gonna have time to get to verse 3, but I got verse 1 done and verse 2. So I got 2 out of 20, and we could have done the whole thing, but if you wanna stick around, we'll go and keep going. I'm just kidding. Anyway, I appreciate all of the comments and the questions, and that's where we're going to end the class tonight. This is so important, this material. I did not want to race through it because I think it is very, very helpful for us to really be spiritually minded people and put spiritual things above everything else in our life. That way we make the right decisions in all that we do. Thank you, and God bless you, and Lord willing, we'll have a video a week from today.